Ben Riley-Smith, political editor of The Telegraph. We're at Pinewood Studios, home of Mission Impossible. Funny enough, that first movie
right?
starring Tom Cruise. Also the Carry On films. We need to decide whether this is Mission Impossible for Keir Starmer, because we've got the studio here decked out, plan for change, it says. We've got his 5 little targets here. There's more missions on the table. What does he need to achieve with this speech, do you think?
Well, I think there are two audiences really. One are voters to convince them what is the purpose of a Keir Starmer premiership. And the other one, I think, is the civil service. When you talk to people in Number 10 about this speech, they say the most powerful words in Whitehall is the Prime Minister wants. And this plan, this 40-page job plan we've got here, is all about showing Whitehall what he wants to focus on the years ahead.
And when they say this is not a reset, just explain that, because it strikes me that it looks a bit like a reset. I mean, plan for change. Change was the motto of the general election campaign. We can accept that. But after nearly 5 months in, it's not going brilliantly.
Yes, well, they argue that this has been months in the planning, so way before Sue Gray went as Downing Street Chief of Staff, way before
that.
Lou Haig went as Transport Secretary. So it's true this has been a long time coming. I suppose the context, though, is there are questions about what a Starmer premiership is for and whether there is this clear central vision. So it is a bit of a line in the sand and trying to make very clear where his government is pointed.
So we're going to be expecting Angela Rayner to introduce the Prime Minister in about 10 minutes' time. Then the Prime Minister will speak and we will react to what he says. Is he able to turn his fortunes around? Is it a mission impossible? We shall see.
Some people may say, that's pretty brave. You've seen the books now. You know how hard that NHS milestone is. Building 1.5 million homes is ambitious, perhaps a little too ambitious. And look, I'll be honest, they're right. We face an almighty challenge to hit these milestones by the end of this Parliament. Like I say, we're starting from ground zero. Waiting lists over 7 million. Housing starts and permission the lowest for a decade. 1 in 3 children not ready for school at the age of 5. And that's kids in reception who aren't starting to read. They're struggling to speak. And, in fact, given our inheritance, let's say on housing starts, clearly, if we don't turbocharge house building with reform, we won't meet that milestone. And if that level of candour surprises you, then honestly, it shouldn't. After all, what is the point of setting a target that you can deliver without bold action? That's not public service. That's political cynicism. No, the job of these milestones is to take our country forward, drive reform through the public sector. It's not about making the government look good. So yes, they are risky for us. Country first, party second. Because that is something we've totally lost sight of in British politics. And to be honest, across Whitehall as well. I don't think there's a swamp to be drained here. But I do think that too many people in Whitehall are comfortable in the tepid bath of managed decline, have forgotten, to paraphrase JFK, that you choose change not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Ben from The Telegraph.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ben Riley-Smith from The Telegraph. Can I go back to that clean energy pledge? You seem to be suggesting nothing's changed, but I've got your manifesto here. It says 0 carbon electricity. That's 100% clean. Today, you're saying 95% clean. So are you really arguing that voters, when they read 0 carbon, should have read 5% carbon?
Well, Ben, the mission hasn't changed from the day I launched it nearly 2 years ago in terms of where we need to get to on clean energy by 2030. It's exactly the same as it always was. There's always going to be a mix, but that is the pledge that we made 2 years ago. That is the mission, and we've not changed it today. Thank you.
Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Why does Keir Starmer say that it's an arbitrary gimmick to set a target on capping migration? In the same breath, you could argue that a net zero by 2030 target is arbitrary and a gimmick.
So we've been clear that net migration needs to come down. We need to bring down both legal and illegal migration. We'll be setting out next year a white paper, which is about how we reduce legal migration, because we've seen that quadruple in just the space of 4 years. And we've seen overseas recruitment quadruple as well. So we're going to need to do that, and we'll set more details out on that. We also need to bring down these dangerous boat crossings that are undermining border security and put lives at risk. I think this is an area where we did have, under the Tories, just a series of both slogans and numbers and so on, which were that they just seemed to be effectively pulling out of thin air, and then they did the opposite. So I think this is an area where there is understandably a lot of scepticism, and our approach, frankly, is to think, look, we're just going to get on with the job. We're going to start taking the practical measures. That includes on linking visa controls to stronger action on training and requirements to have training and higher standards here in the UK in order to bring net migration down, and then on the issues around small boats to get a new agreement with Iraq and with the Kurdish authorities, because we know that some of the gangs who are organising these boat crossings actually are Iraqi Kurdish gangs. So we'll get on with the practical things.
I mean, I think legal migration has to naturally come down anyway, because it was so high from 2023 to now. Having said that, people do want a number to be put on it. It seems to us that most of the data seems to bake in this 350,000 figure a year. Is that too high in your mind, 350,000?
No, and I don't think that anybody has got these proper figures right. So I don't accept the figures that you're talking about.
I mean, that's an IFS figure, I think.
I know. I don't accept.
It might even be an OBR figure, but it seems to be that migration seems to be acceptable at around the 350,000, which is still way, way, way higher than when the last Labour government was in power.
I don't think they've got any particular basis for coming up with those figures, so I don't accept those figures. We've been clear what we need to do is to bring migration down and bring that migration down. I think we know as a country, we've always obviously had people come to the UK to build some of our biggest businesses, to work in public services. That's always been important. But the system has to be controlled and managed. And what we've seen really in the space of just 4 years was the quadrupling of net migration. Underpinning it, one of the biggest drivers, was the quadrupling of overseas recruitment at the same time as apprenticeships were being massively cut, at the same time as you saw the number of adults in training hugely drop. So we need the stronger visa controls, but we also need to tackle some of those underlying issues about apprenticeships, about training, and then link them so that you have a proper workforce strategy. I've asked the Migration Advisory Committee to look particularly, first of all, at issues around engineering and IT, because those are two occupations where there's been very high levels, persistently high levels of recruitment from abroad over a long time, but nothing's been done about what the issues are around engineering, apprenticeships and training and IT here in the UK. So it's those practical measures that are the things that I want to focus on.
All right. Ed Miliband, we've currently got the highest energy costs in Europe. When will those bills come down for ordinary people in the UK?
Well, look, every wind turbine we erect, every solar panel we put up, every piece of infrastructure we build is going to help to get us towards a cheaper, cleaner power. But it will take time. This government didn't come in making a false promise that overnight everything would change. This is hard. This is turning around a super tanker, but it's essential because at the moment we are reliant on fossil fuels, and at the moment we've seen two rises in the price cap since this government came to office, but we don't control that. That's because of the ups and downs of the international fossil fuel market. The only way we get control back, the only way we take back control is by building homegrown clean power, and that's what the mission of the government is.
But don't we need more fossil fuels, not less, particularly when it comes to powering things like generative AI? Aren't your plans are actually pie in the sky when it comes to the practicalities of the energy that we are going to need because of the technological advances we're going to have over the next decade?
No, you're wrong, I'm afraid. Look, the National Energy System Operator says far from being unachievable, our plans are absolutely achievable. And I'm afraid the problem with relying on fossil fuels is we don't need to look into the crystal ball, we just need to look at the record. Because the British families have faced the worst cost of living crisis in generations because of our exposure to fossil fuels. British businesses have been absolutely squeezed by our exposure to fossil fuels. We have no guarantees about what is going to happen to the gas price in the years ahead because it's traded on the international market. The only way we have control is with homegrown, clean power. It's hard, but it's absolutely achievable, and at the same time, it can create tens of thousands of jobs.
The Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, joins me now. Do you think Keir Starmer has done enough in that speech? The Labour Party has been insisting it's not a reset. Struck me that he was trying to set a different tone after what's been quite a difficult 4 to 5 months in office.
Look, I think it's been a difficult 15 years for people. Life has got a lot harder. Living standards have fallen. Lots of people stuck on NHS waiting lists. And I think one of the things that's done is really broken people's faith in the power of government to change their lives. What Keir is setting out today is what our national missions mean in practice for people and will mean by the end of this Parliament, that they will feel that their lives are easier, better, and have money back in their pockets, whether it's their kids being ready for school by the age of 5 so they can go on and thrive, whether it's having energy security so that we don't have to worry about fluctuating energy prices, or whether it's people feeling better off in every nation and region of this country. That's what we're setting out today. We're asking people to hold us to account for doing it. As Keir said, it's a bold thing to do, to set out very big stretching targets for what we're going to deliver by the end of this Parliament, but we know it's essential for people's trust in government.
Although you've got Reform, Nigel Farage's party, nipping at your heels in Wales, I know that your constituents, the good people of Wigan, are concerned about immigration, and yet there's a gaping hole in this plan for change. Nothing on these labels above the stage, nothing concrete in the plan for change on immigration. Keir Starmer's saying, well, if we set a target, it's an arbitrary gimmick.
Well, I don't accept that. In the document, we set out that legal and illegal migration will fall over the course of this Parliament. That would be a major change in approach for this country. The latest immigration figures that came out showed that immigration had quadrupled in the time that the Tories were in office. That is unacceptable. Border security, economic security, national security, these are all the absolute basics that any government must deliver. The document that we've published today says so, and on all three of those we treat them with the utmost seriousness. They are the essential preconditions for being able to drive the change that Keir was setting out today.
But don't voters, particularly in red wall areas and in the north, want a cap? Don't they want an immigration cap on legal immigration? Because, as you say, the figure was nearly at 1 million for the end of 2023. It's too high.
I think they want action. We've had a cap every year for 14 years under a Tory government, and every year for 14 years that cap has been missed. It just didn't exist. It didn't produce anything. I think people want is a plan, and that's what the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has set out. We're going after the criminal gangs that are trafficking people across the Channel. We're determined to smash those gangs. That's why she set up the Border Security Command. And we've set out today that legal and illegal migration will fall by the end of this Parliament. I think that would deliver significant change, because what does it mean? It means that kids in towns like Wigan, where I live, will no longer will this country be able to rely on importing labour from overseas. We'll have to skill up young people in order to get those jobs that they so badly want and deserve. That's part of Yvette's plan to deal with immigration, is to invest in the skills of young people. And I think that's the change that people in Wigan really want to see. Not arbitrary numbers that are never realised, but real change so that they have choices and chances and don't have to get out of towns like Wigan in order to get on.
Lisa Nandy, thank you very much for joining us on the Daily Tea.
Thank you.
Well, I'm back with Ben Riley-Smith, the political editor of The Telegraph. The prelude coming into this, it wasn't that positive, was it? People were saying, is it all going to be a bit of a carry-on? We're at Pinewood, Ben. That's the joke. Is it going to be Mission Impossible? We said that ourselves. He came in on the back of an Ipsos poll revealing that 53% of the public are disappointed with his start to office. Just 22% think he's doing a good job on the NHS alone. It's the reset that isn't a reset. What did you think?
Well, there was no new single massive reveal of a huge target because they've been dribbled out over the last couple of days. So there's now a specific on NHS waiting lists, a specific on getting kids back into school. But there were some interesting nuggets in there that we didn't know. Number one, there was no new numbers pledge to reduce immigration.
No.
Now, remember last week, net migration, hit a peak of almost 1 million. Keir Starmer did a big punchy speech where he came out and said under the Tories there was an open borders experiment. Well, he hasn't put any hard promise on reducing net migration. It's just a kind of broad ambition. So that was really
He said in the
interesting.
Q&A that if he put a number on a migration cap, it would be an arbitrary gimmick, which made me think, well, isn't net zero by 2030 precisely that?
And also the core of this document is putting hard numbers on targets because that's the way you deliver them. So
Yes.
that rationale was kind of entirely flipped for immigration. The second really interesting thing there was about this clean energy pledge.
Yes.
Driven by Ed Miliband. He has talked about zero carbon electricity. Zero is a number, zero. That means it's going to be 100% clean. They slightly tweaked that today. They said it's got to be 95% clean.
Yes.
So that makes it less ambitious.
So we can have 5% of carbon, apparently, and that's okay. That wasn't in the manifesto.
No, they are arguing that there was a reference in the manifesto that said, oh, we will have a backup gas supply. They never put a figure on it.
Yes.
And why that's important is that a lot of people are saying you will never hit 100% clean electricity by 2030. And it appears Labour have kind of accepted that and moved it to 95%.
And the other thing that seemed to be a highlight was the idea of him moving away from that pledge to have the fastest stroke highest growth in the G7. So what's happened to that, Ben?
Well, officially it still stands there, but you can understand the problem. We are not in control of the American economy, the Canadian economy, the French and German economy. And in fact, all the stats show that America and Canada are growing twice as fast as Britain and might continue to in the next couple of years. So they are exposed on that promise. So they've done something today which has come up with a new metric, which is average GDP per capita or real household disposable income. Basically, they're saying everybody will be richer come the end of the parliament. Why is that not that ambitious? Well, as some journalists pointed out, every single parliament since the Second World War has had that increase. So everything else being equal, people will be a bit richer in 5 years' time than they were. So some critics are saying, look, that's not actually that ambitious.
I mean, we're at the home of cinema. Was this box office? I thought it was a bit dead inside this studio. It's a shame, really, because we're in a studio, but we could be anywhere because it's all been decked out with kind of black curtains and then we've got the whole Labour branding on it. But, I mean, you wouldn't know that we're home to the Marvel movies here. It would have required a Herculean superhero effort to turn things around, according to this Ipsos poll. But the trouble is, he just isn't a star, is he? Or am I being harsh, Ben?
Well, Keir Starmer did make a joke about James Bond, but there was no license to thrill. I mean, he is a technocratic politician. Now, some people might say that's what the country needs. We had Boris and all his razzmatazz, but there is some hard yards that have to be put into government to actually deliver, and that was really what the heart of this document was about. It was actually quite interesting how critical of Whitehall he was and the civil service blog.
Yes.
He didn't use that phrase, but he said, I'm not going to say we need to drain the swamp, but too many officials are in this kind of tepid bath of unambition.
It sounded a bit Liz Truss.
It was a bit, yeah. And he wants this document to be a kind of guiding document for the entire civil service so they all know what to focus on in the years ahead.
And the other thing I thought was a bit Johnsonian after Truss was this idea of not just building 1.5 million homes in the next parliament, but also 150 infrastructure projects. It reminded me a bit of Boris going around saying, we need to build bridges.
Yes, he talks about major infrastructure projects. There is no definition of major, though when we get to the election, possibly if there's a kind of new bit of a motorway for half a mile long, they'll count that as a major infrastructure project. But he did talk about, I think the phrase is right, alliance of naysayers, which sounded very like Liz Truss's anti-growth coalition.
Down with the NIMBYs and the naysayers, Ben.
Yeah, are the Telegraph and part of the alliance of naysayers?
I think we probably are. I think we may have some readers who may be described as NIMBY, but there you have it. Ben Riley-Smith, thank you very much indeed. We shall hot-foot it back to Telegraph HQ for you to write it up and for us to talk it up. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.